My name is Patrick Sharbaugh, and yeah, I think Pavel covered pretty much all of this for me, um, which is nice. And LUMA Institute, you'll hear a little bit more about it, but yeah, that's exactly what we do. Is we develop and implement and scale programs of design thinking in the service of innovation for workforces at enterprise clients around the world. As a program manager, a lot of what I do is I develop these relationships with our clients, and I'm a thought partner to them in helping scale these programs across their workforces, and also at the same time helping craft our own products, both our training products and our digital platform, Luma Workplace, which I'll give all of you a look at in a little while. And that keeps me pretty busy. So it's great. The agenda this morning, I really want to talk a little bit about human-centered design. You'll notice that I sort of toggle between calling it design thinking, human-centered design. That's because different people have heard of this in different ways. As far as LUMA is concerned, those are exactly the same thing. So if you hear me say one, please know that I mean both of those. We'll talk a little bit about the key innovative behaviors that underlie human-centered design, and those behaviors are actually pretty important. Talk a little bit about LUMA and the LUMA system. We'll focus specifically in on some problem framing methods that are in the LUMA system and problem framing in general, and why that is so important. And then we'll do a hands-on activity where we'll use one of these methods, and something that hopefully you all can take away with you and use yourselves. And then hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So, you know what I want real quickly is, before I launch into this big spiel about human-centered design, design thinking, maybe it's instructive to have a little bit of a sense of how many people on the call today have some level of familiarity, either theoretical or practical, with human-centered design. Pavel, do you have a survey or a poll that we could put out for people?
Yeah, just launched. Okay, so I guess everyone voted. I'm gonna end. Interesting. Yeah, give me 1 second.
That's a pretty good span. We've
Yeah.
got a few people. About half of people have heard about it. About a quarter seem to be practicing at work, and a little over a quarter are actually facilitating workshops themselves. I know some of those facilitators on this call, so yeah, that's good. Well, the way that LUMA thinks about human-centered design, there's lots and lots of definitions out there, of course. The way that we think about this is a pretty simple definition, and it's this one: the discipline of developing solutions in the service of people. And I'd like to go through that real quick because it helps understand, why we come at it the way that we do. First of all, if we're unpacking that definition, the discipline of this is kind of an important thing of it, right? We feel like the discipline is something that you practice, and the more you practice, the better you get at it. And that's very true of design thinking. The idea of design thinking sometimes suggests that it's something that only happens in your head. Well, that's clearly not true. It's very much a framework for action in terms of innovation. But the more we do it, the better we become. You can't get it just from a single workshop. You can get a great introduction to it, but the doing of it is how we get good at it. And the more we do, the better we become. As Heather Fraser at the Rotman School of Management says, it's not a single event. It's a way of thinking and communicating and doing every day. And LUMA really leans into the everyday part of this, because we do feel strongly, as I'll mention several times, that design thinking is a way to help all of the problems that we encounter in our daily work, whether that is a big D design problem or not. It's a way of making the work that we do every day better. It's also about this idea of developing solutions. And This seems obvious, but it's not always obvious because the word design, I think, is a bit of an obstacle for a lot of people. They think that to design, that you must have a degree in design. And while people who go to design school and have that word on their business cards are exceptionally, capable in terms of design. Design is not limited to people who went to design school. We like to come at design from a very broad perspective. In fact, we like the definition of design that a guy named Herb Simon first wrote about. Herb Simon, Nobel laureate, economist, designer. Some people call him the father of AI. He said that everyone designs who devises courses of action aimed at changing existing situations into preferred ones. And what he means by that is that if you are making things better, then you're designing a better outcome, right? You're designing an outcome that goes from one situation into a better situation. And from that perspective, pretty much all of us are designers, whether or not we went to design school or we have that on our business card. And that's an important aspect of this for LUMA. We believe that everybody is constantly making things better or trying to make things better. And that's why, that's sort of our motto. And this comes back to the idea that this is something that we can all be doing in the work that we do every day. And finally, human-centered design is in the service of people. This is another thing that seems obvious, but you'd be surprised how often the solutions and the frameworks for creative problem solving have nothing to do with people. With teams and organizations that we meet all the time, people are almost always relegated to the background or not included at all. But the truth is that every problem that we are trying to solve is a people problem. Every problem is a people problem. There are no non-people problems, right? Every single problem, we are trying to solve something that makes that final outcome better for people. We're not doing it in service of the technology. We're not doing it in service of the business outcomes, but in terms of the people somewhere in here. And that's why it's called human-centered design so often, right? Because it puts people at the center of this. It doesn't discount those other aspects of, great ideas. Viability is important, feasibility is important, but none of it's gonna work very well if we're not putting human beings at the center of what we're doing. This is borne out by real-world, work and innovations. Steve Jobs famously said, you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. It's shocking how many startups and how many business owners and how many teams fail to do this. They start with the technology and they push it forward and expect marketing or somebody else to make it fit with customer desires. Another guy you may have heard of, up in Seattle, said, we're not competitor obsessed, we are customer obsessed. We start with the customer and we work backwards. Everything they do is in service of making it better for people. And what that means is that we've got to start with people. We've got to understand what they need, what they want, what they desire, not only what their stated desires are, but sometimes what their latent or subconscious desires are. Right? Not everybody understands what good heuristics are, but intuitively they know what good heuristics are when they see them, and that's the basis of good UX. We're going to work with those heuristics, which are all centered around making things intuitive for people. We start with there and build something that works for people. So lots of different definitions of design thinking out there. Here's another one from Tim Brown at IDEO. Many of you may be familiar with. But fundamentally, some of you may be familiar with this Venn diagram. The idea here is that great ideas, the best innovative ideas, they live at the center of this Venn diagram, right? Feasibility, very important. Viability, is there a financial business model behind this? Can it pay for itself and possibly then some? But desirability, will people like it? Can they use it? Does it solve a problem for them? That's really important. And human-centered design understands that all of these things are really important, but we really need to start with desirability and make sure that we're coming back to that repeatedly all the way through the development process. We can't just start with it and then discard it and only move on to the other ones. So human-centered design, as we think about it, and I'll introduce you to the LUMA methods in just a few minutes, but really what's at the root of human-centered design, we have found, is ways of acting and ways of behaving and ways of approaching problems and solutions. And there's really 6 ways, and LUMA's about 10 years old, and back right when we started as a spin-off of Maya Design. Maya Design was doing some work with General Dynamics at the time. And of course, it was a very human-centered approach to that consulting work. And General Dynamics said, we really like the way you guys approach your work. We'd be interested if you could teach us how to do that. And LUMA had to really think, of course, LUMA emerged from that. But what they really wanted to think about, why these methods? Why do we use these methods themselves? And did a big survey of innovative teams and organizations and individuals, and found these sort of 6 that are out there. And these 6 are really important because this is fundamentally what people are doing when they are practicing design thinking or human-centered design, or really, being innovative. They work in ways that are visual, right? They make what's in their head tangible, whether that's with a sketch or a prototype or building something to learn. They take what's in their head and make it tangible somehow. That's really, really important. It's a great aid in thinking and communicating. We show instead of tell. We're questioning, right? The idea of questioning the question before attempting to solve. It's human nature, for all of us, to want, as soon as we hear a problem, we all want to jump straight to that solution. It comes very naturally to us. Oh, what if we did this? But that's almost always a bad idea, because that, unless we have a really good understanding of the problem, and unless we've specifically spent some time understanding the problem, we probably don't, then it's way too early for solutioning. And we need to pause and make sure that we are seeking different ways to characterize a problem and do some problem framing. Imagination over here on the left side, we want to make sure that our ideas are framed around human insights into the space in which we're trying to solve a problem, and around human behavior. And also that we're not just coming up with one idea. We have lots of ideas. As Linus Pauling said, if you want to have a good idea, have lots of ideas. And that's what we mean by imagination there. Collaboration, bit of a buzzword these days, but I think it gets taken for granted, because collaboration is not just talking with somebody. It's not just giving somebody a status update. Collaboration means working together across business departments and silos in a very multidisciplinary format, having lots of different kinds of people on a team, and doing so in a way that you're building something together. You're not just talking with each other, you're building something together. I mean, the root there is to labor, co-labor, right? You're working together. Being empathetic is really one of the most important ones on here. The idea that we're driven by curiosity, and not just curiosity about the problem, but very specifically curiosity about people. What makes people tick? Why do they do what they do? Not just what they do, not just how long do they spend on a website, but why are they only spending that long on the website? What causes them to jump off, right? And this means that in order to understand these things, we have to reach beyond those quantitative metrics and into the more qualitative ways of understanding, those ethnographic and anthropological tools that allow us to understand human behavior, the layers of human experience, why people do what they do, not just what they do. Placing those user needs above all other considerations. And finally, being iterative, right? Not just trying to get it all done in one go and brushing our hands of it, but understanding that failure can be a great option when that failure is fast and cheap. And it allows us to advance an idea to make it better and more fit to purpose for the people for whom we are designing that solution, right? So these 6 behaviors underlie really all the, every process out there and every framework for human-centered design and design thinking that you may have seen really is built on the scaffold of these behaviors. And so the key with those behaviors, though, is it's very hard to walk up to somebody and say, I need you to be more visual. I need you to be more iterative. I need you to be more empathetic. because these are very abstract ideas, and without an actual mechanic to operationalize these things in our everyday behavior, it's very hard to make them real in our behavior. And so this is why Luma came up with our system. And when I refer to the LUMA system, really this is what it is. It's these 36 methods. And you'll notice that I don't talk about a LUMA process. And that's because it's not a process. There's lots of great processes out there, lots of great human-centered design processes. Stanford D School has a great process. IDEO has a great process. IBM has a process. Virtually every major agency, out there, design agency has a process. And most of those processes are not only pretty good, but they're all almost exactly the same thing when it comes to a process of innovation. What we realize that is that people that they don't need another process. What they need is a way to use the processes that they have better. So that's really what we came up with, is these 36 methods. I mentioned before that Luma, the most of the work that Luma does is with large enterprises, large organizations. And one of the things that we discovered early on is that those organizations don't need 1,000 design thinking systems and another process. They don't even need 100 design thinking methods. What they need is a nice, tight core set of useful, easy to use, easy to teach, easy to learn, and universally applicable methods that can create a common vocabulary for everyone in the organization. So they all know what they're talking about when somebody says a method. And that's why we sort of limit ourselves to 36. We certainly don't want to suggest that there are only 36 good methods out there in the canon of design methods. There's many more, and that's why we have, you'll see your favorite method down there. We certainly encourage people to explore other methods beyond these, and if they're useful, to use them. If they want to use empathy mapping, by all means, they should be using that. If they want to use any of the other methods that are out there that they find useful, they should use that. But as a core set, this is what we have. And you'll notice that set is really, it's built around 3 different kinds of methods. And the looking, understanding, and making methods. And the looking methods they're really all ways of understanding human experience. Some of those are ethnographic in nature. It means going out there into the field and observing people up close, and sometimes in the context in which they're doing the thing that we want to make better, or observing it, talking to them, interviewing, immersing ourselves in that experience. Some of those are more participatory, where we might bring people in somewhere and have them undertake an activity that helps us understand what's important to them, or what they might like to see. Things like what's on your radar, or build your own. And some of those are evaluative, whether that's evaluating a prototype or an existing product or service. We can use something like heuristic review or critique to better understand and create a benchmark for those things, so that we know we're advancing intelligently. A lot of these methods are around understanding. And that means understanding the problem that we're trying to solve, right? Could be understanding people and systems, stakeholder mapping. I just made a stakeholder map today. Experience diagramming, you may also know as journey mapping, customer journey mapping. There's lots of ways of diagramming human experience. Some of these could be around prioritizing things, and certainly problem framing, which we'll come back to in a minute. And then the making methods, which are all about envisioning the future, whether that's with concept ideations, all the alternatives to brainstorming that exist out there, things like thumbnail sketching. You might like Crazy Eights from the design sprints. That's certainly one that you could use in here. Lots of other ways of coming up with a lot of ideas. Modeling and prototyping is going to be a big one. And then design rationale, make it an argument for our design to be able to sell that and get buy-in for it. And these 36 methods, Luma finds are great methods for doing very big D design work in organizations. The kind of organizations that we're working with, whether that's Slack or Microsoft or Starbucks, their design teams have aligned themselves around these methods and are using them not just singly, but often in combination. And that's one of the nice ways that this method works, is that these methods can be used singly, but also in combination with each other to create more outcomes that create much larger business outcomes for us. So what we like to think about that system of LUMA methods is that it's a little bit like it's a taxonomy, right? Sort of like the alphabet is a taxonomy or a system. Any of those letters, we understand what they stand for by themselves, but the real power of an alphabet comes when you can begin to combine those letters to create specific outcomes, which we know as words and sentences and paragraphs. That's the real utility of a system like an alphabet, and it's also the utility of a system like the LUMA method, the LUMA system. Just like the alphabet, the methods in a LUMA system are not infinitely combinable. Some methods are going to go better with other methods, but for the most part, they work pretty well in combination with each other, with a very few general rules of thumb and how we're combining them. Let me pause there real quickly and see what questions anybody might have, and for me to catch my breath.
I saw one question from the chat, like whether slides can be shared.
Yeah, you bet. Happy to share these slides.
Awesome.
Yeah. I said before that we don't suggest a processes. There are lots of processes. We're happy to work with whatever those processes are, instead of competing with them. So, for example, if you're an agile shop, we're happy to show you how LUMA methods, and as we do with a lot of our clients and partners, where they can insert LUMA methods to help make that process work a little bit better for them, to operationalize it nicely. If you happen to be a big design sprint group, as I was working with Slack recently and talking to them very specifically about how the LUMA methods can be used to empower and supercharge a design sprint. Again, that's not to say that the methods that are in a design sprint are not useful, but the LUMA methods can fit in here very nicely, and sometimes groups find that they work better for them. If you're a big fan of the UK double diamond process, again, any of these methods slot in very neatly to those 4 phases. And you can even see that we've got a partnership with Google Ventures and their design sprints team, where we've got what we call recipes or combinations of methods that are specifically designed to advance a particular phases of a design sprint. We've got something like 20 or so different recipes that would slot in there. So it's a really versatile system of methods, and we think that by focusing on the methods instead of a process, it allows people to have a lot more flexibility about how they approach their projects, and little tiny work that they do on a Tuesday morning as well. So what I want to do as we're moving forward here is, I mentioned that we're going to focus a little bit on problem framing, and that really brings us back to this behavior of questioning. The idea that we want to question the question before attempting to solve it, right? Gain alignment from the team on the challenge. Make sure that we're not just solving, but we're a well understood human problem. Not just any problem. We're not trying to solve a technical problem. Of course, the technical part of this is important, but the technical stuff is always going to be in service of people. We want to make sure that we're doing something that ultimately benefits people. And a lot of the technology, as you all no doubt have experienced, a lot of technology fails to take into account that there are actually human beings on the other side of that technology, and that they are using it. And this is especially true now that we're very much living in an experience economy. It used to be enough to be able to compete on price and features. But price and features alone these days, it's a race to the bottom, because price and features alone are not going to be able to distinguish you and differentiate you in an experience economy, where people are expecting not just to have a product or a service, but they're expecting to be able to have a seamless end-to-end intuitive and delightful experience across multiple touch points in that involve that product or that service. You've no doubt all heard this by now before, but designing for experiences is helpful to us because it forces us to focus on the people for whom we're designing, because only people can have an experience. And when we're designing experiences, it really allows us to come up with really innovative ways of delighting them and of solving their actual problems, which is very important. It means we need to understand what those problems are before we start solving for it. So there's a great and a little bit of an older case study around the need for great problem solving. Back in the early 60s, when NASA was first developing its space program, one of the things they realized pretty quickly on was that they're like, you know what, we need a space pen, because the ballpoint pens that we have are not, once they get up there into orbit and in a zero gravity environment, those ballpoint pens stop working. We clearly need a space pen. And so NASA spent somewhere around $1,063,000 developing a space pen. Because that was obvious, right? They needed a space pen, better spend the money and make a space pen. Well, some years later, they realized that the Russians had been faced with the same problem. But instead of a space pen, what had the Russians done? They'd used a pencil. The Russians had decided to use a pencil. This is a classic example of jumping straight to solutions before we know what problem we're trying to share, right? Because what happened was somebody back in NASA said, "Oh boy, our ballpoint pens don't work in outer space." So they declared the problem and said, "Problem is clearly understood. That's all that we need to know." The next natural step for them would have been to say, "We need a solution. One solution is good enough. Let's just come up with that straight line from the problem declaration to the solution." And that's what we need, a space pen. I'm curious to know how many of you encounter that same mindset in your own work. How often do you hear, "We need to do this. We need this. We need one of these." It's not necessarily a bad thing, because it is human nature, but we do need to resist that impulse, because most problems require us to understand the problem first really well, especially the human problem, before we start solving it. So one of the ways that could have been improved upon was to reframe that problem slightly, right? Well, maybe we don't need a space pen. What we really need, we need to be able to write in zero gravity. And you can see here, instead of drawing a straight line from problem declaration to solution, we've drawn a little bit of some angled lines, which suggests we're creating a few more choices for ourselves around the solutions that we have to consider, right? It's not just one solution. Now how might we write in zero gravity? Well, there's quite a number of different ways that we might even, they might have even considered that in a broader way. Is it really necessary to write? What we really need to do, perhaps, is to simply record and archive our notes and thoughts in zero gravity. Maybe that's what we're really after. And you can see there's a even larger possible number of ideas that framing the problem in that way gets to. This brings us back to this idea of being imaginative. We don't want just one idea. We want lots of ideas, right? We want lots of ideas, because a pool of ideas, especially if we force ourselves to think about unorthodox and sometimes even, kind of crazy ideas, that's going to be a far more fertile pool for us to work from than simply one status quo, run-of-the-mill idea. So this is what didn't happen, but it could have happened. And this is this idea of questioning what we want to do wherever possible. Certainly when we're thinking about solutions, is to give ourselves lots of leeway, lots of possible ways of imagining solutions. That is to create choices for ourselves and making choices. Sometimes this is referred to as divergent thinking and convergent thinking, where in the divergent thinking, we are creating choices for ourselves. And in the convergent thinking, we're making choices. We're reducing those, looking for patterns, and reducing that number, down selecting. And you'll find that a lot of design thinking is simply an alternating dance between these two kinds of thinking: creating choices for ourselves, making choices for ourselves, divergent thinking, convergent thinking. And that also applies to the problem. You know, if we're thinking whatever that initial frame of the problem is, we need a space pen or we need to build an app, it's always useful to say why. Why do we need to, why is this a problem? For whom is this a problem? Is that really the right problem? And go through the same process. Create choices for ourselves and make choices for ourselves, right? We want to think, what are all the, let's do some research here. Let's understand all the possible, the scope of this problem and all the different facets of this problem, and then synthesize it to where we understand the most salient aspects of this problem and orient ourselves to solving the most salient aspects of this, or perhaps the ones where the opportunity for innovation is greatest. Again, diverging and converging. And you'll see this is very much the, I think it's the Stanford D School process here, or this is really the UK Double Diamond. Discover, define, design, and deliver. Those four phases are really what underpins almost every good innovation process that's out there. This is often called the double diamond of design. Some of you may have heard of the double diamond. Let's focus a little bit on this problem. And what's interesting about the double diamond, I really like it because it shows us that the way that it's illustrated, the problem space over here on the left side is just as important as the solution space. They are equal in size because coming up with a bad solution is, no matter how good the solution is, if you're solving the wrong problem, it's all wasted time. It's like, being in an airplane. You make a perfect landing, wonderful. That perfect landing is wasted if you land at the wrong airport. We want to make sure that not only are we making a great landing, but we're landing at the correct airport. And that's why problem framing is so important. So earlier I pointed out specifically down at the bottom in the center that we've got 4 methods in the LUMA system that are specifically geared toward problem framing. And I want to look at those methods a little bit here. And we're actually going to get hands-on with one of those, problem tree analysis. I'm going to skip past that and come back to it. So problem tree analysis is pretty straightforwardly named method. Has anybody ever heard? Pipe up if in the chat if you've heard of problem tree analysis. It's a way of exploring the causes and effects of a particular problem. There may be some relationship here with the Toyota 5 whys, the idea of asking why 5 times. That's the part of that very much lives inside a problem tree. What you fundamentally got with a problem tree is you start with the most obvious focal point of a problem that your team is seeing, right? Whatever that thing is, everyone says, this is a problem. That's what you start with. You put that in the very center. In the example here, it says boating accidents, but you can imagine it's all kinds of things. And on the bottom of the problem tree analysis, what we might call the roots of the problem, if we're that metaphor of a tree, the roots of that are going to be the things that sequentially contribute or cause the problem. They are upstream of what we've identified as the most the focal problem. So those are the things that cause it, right? And above in the branches of this metaphorical tree are what we say, what are the downstream consequences of this problem? What are the results of this in a larger picture? And once we begin doing this, we really begin to understand what's the scope of the problem, and we align our team on understanding the big picture of this problem. And we also can line up where's the most efficacious place to tackle this problem. Is it in fact that very first focal point that we thought is, for example, not being able to write in zero gravity our problem, or is it something else? Is it possibly upstream of this? Is in this example, is boating accidents merely a symptom of problems that we need to be tackling closer to the root? Or is it possibly somewhere in the branches? It's a little bit bigger scope that we're looking at. And so that's what we want to do with the problem tree analysis. It's a fantastic way of making sure that we understand the full picture and that we can align our team on exactly where the entry point for this, at least as a start. We'd probably also want to follow that up with some research around the people who are experiencing the problem, living the problem, to possibly continue to reframe it. But this is a great way of getting that big picture, understanding of it. Let me pause real quickly for questions about problem tree analysis.
Guys, feel free to speak up.
I'm looking at, there's a few questions in here I'm seeing. What about a situation where clients give you specs that are not easy to make? How do you manage users' expectations under those circumstances? What role does empathy play there? Well, that's certainly a very real problem. One of the first things that we probably want to try to do is to help the client understand the value of solving a problem for their customers, an actual well understood problem, right? When they're giving you specs, I would first probably want to interrogate, that with a why. Why this feature? Why this feature? Why this feature? In a way that's inclusive, not that's confrontational or judgmental, obviously, but in a way that says we really want to make sure that you're spending your money as wisely as you can, and therefore that we're solving the right problem. That the outcome that you get from this is going to be a perfectly fit to purpose that's solving an actual problem for your customers. Let's do a method like problem tree analysis or abstraction laddering and make sure that we understand that. If they say, we don't know, this is just what our product developers think we should do, they've never actually talked to our customers, then I'd be very concerned. I'd probably want to make a case, if it's possible, for getting some actual data, not just analytics, but some field data from people. No matter how small it is, any data is going to be more helpful than none. And letting them know that, solving the wrong problem is costly. Solving the wrong problem is costly. If your job to make the product based on the specs they give you, or are you doing research, again, ideally, you'd love to be able to do that. It's not always possible. It's certainly not always possible to go out there and do a month worth of ethnographic research. But there's often lots of shortcuts that you can find. Who faces the customer? Who interacts with the customer? Is it a customer support team? I bet you have access to them. You could talk to them and learn a lot about those customers and what they're dealing with, where you don't necessarily have to have access to the customers themselves. Flexibility to gather more information about the product and users. Again, not everybody has that flexibility, but where we can get that, it's super important to do that. Nora also asked, are you doing a problem framing session before the tree so you know what problem you're trying to solve as a focus point? You could. I wouldn't say that's necessary because you could almost just choose something arbitrarily. Just slap it out there. What are people talking about? Slap it out there, and a good problem tree is going to reveal it is the problem framing activity, right? It's not necessary to find the perfect one to be in the center, because otherwise we wouldn't need the method, right? All you need to know is just start somewhere and then let the method take you and hopefully end you up on where you ought to be. It is possible that at the end of this method, you'll end up with the originally framed problem as being the one you end up with as well. Great, fine. This is a 30-minute exercise at the outside. I mean, it could take longer, it could also take shorter, but it's not a lot of time. And at the end of it, your team will all have a totally good understanding of what the scope of the problem is, why you've decided to land exactly on here, and how they're going to be moving forward on this. That kind of alignment is not as common as it ought to be. So it's a great team alignment method as well. So I'm gonna move forward and on Luma Workplace, which I'll show you all in a few minutes. It's a digital platform we have that helps people continue to learn how to use these methods and use them in a very, very step-by-step sequence. Lots of videos and tutorials and templates in there, downloadable templates, and also Mural and Miro templates, and lots of recipes on how to combine these methods together, pre-existing recipes that have really like a good recipe book for methods that go well with each other. And you'll see there's lots of those methods with problem tree analysis on what we might do after a problem tree analysis or as part of a recipe. So what I wanted to introduce here is sort of a practice scenario. We're gonna do a problem tree analysis. I'm gonna walk you through that, and we're gonna jump into a new job here for a few minutes, and we're going to imagine that we all work for a small regional cinema chain that owns multiplexes in 4 different states, and we're going to say that over the past 6 or so years, you've watched as ticket sales have fallen ever lower. Well before the pandemic, ticket sales were falling. So rather than jumping at the very first solution that occurs to the team, you've decided to spend some time making sure that you have the problem properly framed. And you've decided to start with a problem tree analysis. I'd love to hear from each of the groups who are working on well, just in general, I'd like to hear how that went for you all, what you thought of that. Was it what you expected? Was it a little easier, a little harder? What was interesting about it?
Patrick, my group had some really good conversation as we moved through, questions. And I want Christopher and Ryan to chime in because they had some really good questions that came up about looking at, the causes. And then are we actually moving down towards to find the root, like the 5 whys? Like, are you taking your initial, oh, we're not making enough money, down to why we're not making enough money, why in this diagram? And then on the top, their questions were, do we have to have those green pieces be analogous, aligned to what your causes were at the bottom?
Good question. Yeah, good questions. The second one first. No, the leaves don't necessarily have to align to what you're finding down below. They can, but they don't necessarily have to. You'll find there's a through line. If we've, there tends to be a through line which all goes through that central problem. So what we don't want to do is go up to one of our leaves and go, oh, we're not making enough money, and then start doing a separate branch that has nothing to do with people not coming to our cinema anymore, right? Because the through line needs all to be interrogating that central problem. So we don't want to say, well, why aren't people coming to the cinema anymore? Oh, well, our advertisers are no longer with us. Maybe that has something to do with
Well, Christopher and Ryan had a really good question about, if we're staff and we're doing this exercise, how is that connected to our users? And couldn't we use this exercise with group of our users as we're doing some interviews and things, and be either capturing their ideas as we ask them these questions, or using it virtually with them. What do you think of
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. That's an inspired thinking right there. We always want to place those people for whom we're solving the problem at the center of this. A problem tree analysis can be used in a couple of ways. It can be one way is just to get a general sense of the the myriad puzzle pieces that are connected parts of this problem, so that we can begin, thinking, well, where's a good place to begin exploring? It certainly doesn't mean that is the final frame to the problem, because as you note, um, even if we're employees of this company, all this is speculation. The best way to understand what the real problems are is to go and observe people. As I was talking to somebody else, this is a classic example of where we would want to do some of that ethnographic research and understand, why are people not coming to the cinema anymore? Those who are coming, what's bringing them back? And to really, do some of that deep exploration of understanding the lived experience of those people, um, to understand, why are they going to our competitors instead of us, or maybe our competitors is Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus. What is it that's keeping them at home? Is it a parking? There's not enough parking. Is it they don't like the traffic? Is the food not bad? Are the seats too sticky? Or is it the size of the screen is too small? There's a million things that we could find out by speaking to people, and that's going to help us focus on making a cinema that's more responsive to the actual experience people want to see. But we would start with something like this, and then they could be part of a collaborative, co-creative effort in this method. Sure.
So Patrick, the last, I swear this will be my last question for my group. So basically, this is a good place for us to start as a group to make our tacit understanding of what each other thinks overt by putting it out on the table and leveling the playing field to really kind of see what the field is. The question that my team had was like, well, how do you go from this to actually having those great ideation ideas?
Yeah. Well, what we want to do here, and if I could take us back real quickly to the PowerPoint deck, right? Let's see if I can scoot out here without sending everybody into a, right? We're playing around in this problem space, right? Once we've got an absolute and really firm understanding of what the problem is that we are solving, the key problem, maybe more than one, but certainly a very small handfuls of key problems. Maybe these are touch points across a journey map and an experience, or maybe it is something as simple as how do we compete with Netflix and Hulu. At that point, we are confident in knowing what the problem is. And from there, then we can begin to generate, unorthodox and innovative ideas. But we can't start coming up with those ideas until we are absolutely certain that we know that we are solving the right problem. And this is part of the problem framing process. We're tooling around in this left side, where part of this is, as you'll note, that I talk about divergence and convergence. Sometimes we see both divergence and convergence in a single method, as we do in this method. We start out this method by generating a lot of choices. Very convergent, almost in a brainstorm fashion of generating lots of thoughts around, these root causes and these leaves that are the consequences. And then as we progress toward wrapping up this activity, we begin to make choices. We're converging toward what we think is the most likely possible ways of doing that. We could do that again around our customer research, generate a lot of data in our research, and then synthesize that data so that we're making choices around it. What's the most relevant? What's the most salient? What's the most insightful? So that we're going to land eventually at, one or two really key things upon which we can begin brainstorming, or whatever the mechanic is that we're generating ideas. What else did we think about that method?
Patrick, Monica here. I found some similarity in a way with the fishbone diagram technique, that which is also about a cause and effect. Although the fishbone is more restricted, this one allow me to think a little bit more outside the square than the fishbone, but I found some similarities.
I am not familiar with the fishbone technique, Monica.
This is an old sort of diagram called fishbone diagram. It was created, I guess, sometime or a long time ago by someone called Ishikawa, if I am not mistaken, if I can pronounce the name correctly.
Yeah.
Yes, as a business analyst, this part of one of the techniques that we, during those many years, we just try to absorb. But similar to this, we try to find the cause and the effect of a problem to see how we can come with a solution later.
Yeah. You know, a lot of these methods, like problem tree analysis, very specifically, you know, they're very purposeful in making sure that we're not suggesting solutions, right? All we're trying to do here is land on the right starting place to explore a problem. If we've got enough data and it's human-centered data, we might be able to use this to, as Nora suggested, to land on our final problem frame. In my experience, that's pretty rare, but it can certainly be part of that process. Yeah. The great thing about this, again, is not necessarily that we're going to be reframing our problem. It's not necessary. It's an opportunity to reframe our problem, but it's not an obligation to do so. One of the best things that can come out of this is, as we heard, it's that alignment of the whole team and understanding all the other possible places that we could be, aligning ourselves around the problem. And as a group, we've had that conversation and we've decided, nope, this is the one. This is where we need to be pointing ourselves. And that kind of alignment and that agreement and consensus on moving forward is really powerful when you're on a team, to have that moving forward. Because you all know why you're doing it, right? So I'm going to stop sharing the mural board. I'm going to go back to our deck real quick. And there's a couple of other methods that I want to briefly mention. Quickly, the benefits of a problem tree analysis helps us untangle those complex problems. Certainly reveals various causes and effects, but it builds that shared understanding and provides a direction for problem solving. Even if it's not the ultimate solution itself, it's a direction for problem solving, and that's what we really want at this point. Abstraction laddering is a method that's very sort of like sisters with problem tree analysis, but we come at this in a slightly different way. It's a way of reconsidering a problem statement rather than a problem. It's you might say it's like a how might we statement, or a we should do this, by broadening or narrowing its focus. Looks a little bit like a problem tree analysis, but what we're doing instead is, if somebody says we need to do this, you say, okay, we do this. Why would we do that? We're asking above, we're asking why. In other words, not why is this a problem, but what beneficial outcome do we hope to achieve by doing this thing? If somebody's proposing a solution, why would we do that? What do we hope to achieve by doing that? And then we can move up that ladder of abstraction by continuing to ask, and what does that get us? And what does that get us? Right? Similarly, we can continue to, on an abstraction ladder, we could think about that problem or that possible way forward in less abstract, more concrete terms. In other words, we're asking, what are the ways in which we could operationalize doing that, right? Um, and continuing to ask, how would we do that, and then how would we do that, and then how would we do that? It's a great way of understanding. Another way of scoping our approach to a problem. We could even take where we come out with a problem tree analysis, put a how might we on that, drop it in the middle of an abstraction ladder, and use abstraction laddering as a way to kick the tires, sort of, on that problem frame. This is a really powerful one. Again, if a client says we need to do that, or here's what we need to do, here are the specs. This is a great way to collaboratively and in an inclusive way with the client stress test that and say, okay, I hear you saying we need an app. Why do we need an app? What beneficial outcome for the client, for the customer, are we gonna get with an app? And what's that gonna get? And what's that gonna get? And it really helps you unpack some assumptions that are often baked into these ways forward, that makes them very visible and transparent to everyone, and often leads to a reframing of the challenge. I'm going to move past that one. Another really common one is a way of framing a problem is rose thorn bud. Rose thorn bud is pretty common. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some people out there who have used it before. It's been around a lot. It's super easy to use. Essentially, it's a way of identifying things as positive, negative, or having potential. This is great when, for example, we've got a set of data and we want to codify that data, whether that's research data. We've just done an interview with somebody. We want to codify that stuff. So what we could do is take, or we could just be sitting around a table with people. Everybody's got an opinion. We want to do a retrospective on a project, for example. All right, what went well with this project, or what's going well now on what we're doing, and all those things go down on pink or red sticky notes. The metaphor is a rose, so that's positive. It's the rose, it's the flower part of the rose. These are things that it's easy, it's delightful, it's working. It's in all the ways that something could be positive. And then we'd say, all right, let's switch over to thorns. And these are going to be negative. Anything that is not working, it's difficult, it's challenging, it's painful, it's time consuming, it's hard to understand, it's not intuitive. All the possible ways that things could be negative that we're capturing data on, those are thorns. And then the green ones would be anything that has potential. It's an opportunity. Sometimes we think about an opportunity as a solution without the how baked in, right? But it also could just be an observation that we had that we thought was really interesting. Rose thorn bud, really powerful way. And then we could take all those and cluster those, and start to look for interesting clusters and insights and what those clusters tell us. This is an example of how we've clustered a bunch of rose thorn buds, and from that been able to pull out some really interesting insights based on all that observational data. Again, on our digital platform, LUMA Workplace, you can see a lot of ways of combining rose thorn bud with other methods. And finally, I suspect many of you also use this one. Pavel, you had a quick question about what?
Yeah, about rose thorn bud. Yeah, I just curious, like whether this example again, if it's problem framing technique, should we be looking for kind of challenges or trying to kind of ideate around that? Like, what are the items that usually we put there?
I would say that because problem framing, rose thorn bud, it's an understanding method, right?
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, it's a problem framing technique. So typically what we're doing is we're capturing observations, either somebody else or our own observations around an existing situation. that helps us better understand the situation. Let's say, for example,
I've seen it
I've got a
used
bunch
in,
of interview notes from somebody. I could go through my interview notes and capture what this person thought was, maybe I interviewed somebody who's going to a movie cinema.
Mm-hmm.
All the things they like about going to my cinema that are easy, that's positive,
Hmm.
I'm capturing on roses. The things that are difficult, it's hard to get to, the tickets are expensive, um, the screen is too small, I don't like the movies they show, those all go on thorns. And then the opportunities, or anything that I hear them saying that strikes me as, that's interesting. They 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 stay home because they watch YouTube, and they don't watch all that many movies. That's an interesting opportunity. What if we didn't show exclusively movies? There's an interesting opportunity there. I don't know how that would be possible. I'm just saying it's an interesting bud that pops up to me. This person saying they really love watching YouTube, but it sucks that they have to watch it on their tiny little phone screen. Huh. So we're always capturing information about an existing situation. Um, Another way to use rose thorn bud is as a feedback mechanism. Somebody says, "Hey, everybody, I'm going to give you a talk. I've got an idea. I'm going to put this out there. At the end of this idea, I'd love your feedback on what I shared with you." Boom. Let's hear roses. What did you like about what I had to say? You get all this great feedback. Thorns. What did I say that you thought could be problematic or difficult? You get that. And then again, buds. This is especially useful if you're proposing an idea or a possible solution. Get that really useful feedback, on ways that they love this about the idea. This is going to be very difficult, they can imagine, and these are ways to make it better.
Got it. Thank you.
And the final method in our problem framing category is, we call them statement starters. Sometimes they're called "how might we" statements, because "how might we" is one of the more common ways of phrasing a statement starter. We find there's lots of, but certainly one of the most popular ways of doing that is these simple three words: "how might we." And "how might we" it's like the cherry on top when we've got a really well understood problem, or an insight that we know this is what we need to be working on for people. This is the nub right here. What "how might we" does is it turns that problem into an opportunity for us by using these three words to frame it as a way of pointing ourselves towards solutions, right? If we think about that double diamond, and the left side of that is all the problem space, "how might we" statement starter, that method is going to live right at the center where those two diamonds meet. It's going to allow us to take the problem that we've identified and turn it into an actionable opportunity upon which we can begin generating ideas. How might we solve this? How might we do this? How might we create a way for people to record, and archive their thoughts while in space, right? And the great thing about "how might we" is it's doing a lot of work with those three words. The "how" says that we're no longer asking why or what. We're asking how, which points us towards solutions and suggests that there are solutions out there. The "might" keeps it very, very open, right? This points us toward divergent thinking and creating choices. We're not going to settle for a single idea. We're going to come up with a bunch of possible ideas, and specifically some really unconventional and perhaps disruptive ideas. We're not locking ourselves to anything. And the "we," of course, says that this is best done in a group, collaboratively. So how might we, it's been called the secret phrase that top innovators use by Harvard Business Review. Again, I suspect that lots of people on this call have probably used that quite a lot. One of the ways that I used this was when, a couple of years ago, right before the pandemic, I was contracted by Sonos to help them redesign their in-store retail displays globally. And we started with something that looked very much like this. And rather than just throwing a bunch of features on it that they thought people might find useful, they decided to bring in an ethnographic researcher, someone like me, who could help them frame that problem properly. So I spent a lot of time in Best Buys and other electronic stores around these retail displays, observing people, talking to people, having them walk me through what they were doing at these displays, sort of speaking to me as they helped understand how they evaluated the quality of the music, the quality of the speaker, and understood Sonos as a brand and as a system. The experience that they were having, in other words, around these displays. And there were lots of fascinating things that I found in this process. You could see people crouching down to try to read the tiny little print on these things. This guy's telling me that the best way to listen for music is to touch the speaker, and he would put his finger in his opposite ear. This guy over here on the left side is trying to pick up one of their Bluetooth speakers, their mobile Bluetooth speakers, and being frustrated by, it's called the Move. The name of that speaker is called the Move, but he's frustrated because it doesn't move. It's bolted to the display. And so he's, why do they call it the Move if you can't move it? So ultimately, when I captured all this data over a couple of months of gathering research, I framed the insights that I put together in terms of how might we questions, right? How might we empower and inspire shoppers with a better understanding of how to listen for great audio quality? One of the things that was clear in the research was that most people don't trust themselves to be good judges of what great audio even sounds like. They don't believe themselves experts in that. So they all had these little hacks that they would do to try to figure out, is this really good or not? Or do I just have to take the word of the brand? How might we assure each listener has easy access to exactly the right song for him or her? There were only 5 songs that this thing played, and for many of these people, they were all contemporary hits. But the kind of people who are investing the amount of money in these kinds of speakers typically didn't listen to the kind of music that this display was playing for them. And so they wanted to say, I want to listen to my music. That's how I can tell if it sounds good. And so on and so forth. So you can see the ways that we would frame, rather than just arbitrarily choosing features to throw at this display, we did research and framed the problem around the actual challenges that people who use these displays are having. Well understood displays. We're not relying only on big data or analytics or surveys. We're watching people, speaking to them on site, framing that problem for them using some of these methods, and then setting ourselves to come up with truly innovative and potentially disruptive solutions to solving actual problems for people. This particular project got put on hold right at the beginning of the pandemic, which kind of sucks because I was very excited to see what we got out of this. So again, the benefits of how might we question challenges your assumptions, helps you see those different perspectives, provides a direction for problem solving, and invites that divergent thinking. Lots of ideas out of this. Let me pause there and see what questions I've not yet addressed or that you might have.
I have general question about LUMA system. Given the number of exercises that are outlined, I'm curious whether, along these 10 years, you either try to expand or shrink, or find out that there are certain elements that you would like to add within this alphabet of the methods.
Yeah, great question. I will say that we've not thought about shrinking the 36, and we really don't also think about the expanding it, because once you start expanding it, it's a slippery slope. We do again encourage people to find methods that are if they've got a favorite method and it's not in the LUMA system, by no means do we want them to stop using that method. If they're finding that it's useful and it gets the outcomes that they want from it, we encourage them to keep doing that. But as a core set for our clients, 36 seems to be the sweet spot. Now, we do, and almost all those clients do have additional methods that they have and within particular teams. We have thought carefully about updating this last year with LUMA's 10-year anniversary, and we had hoped to be able to put out a new book. We have a book called Innovating for People, which has all these on there. But we've put a lot of thought into what the next iteration of the LUMA system is going to look like. And there are going to be a couple of methods that probably get the boot that have over the past 10 years, or maybe a little bit less useful, or maybe only have very, very niche use, and replacing those with some others. For example, I think persona profiles are going to go away. Persona profiles can be very, very useful under certain circumstances, but it's almost never going to be something that you do in a workshop setting. A persona profile is going to be a much longer sort of thing that comes from some of the experts on your team. And we also find that persona profiles are having the same kind of conversations that people are having around archetypes that you'll find. We've thought about adding an empathy map in there. Empathy map gets a lot of work. Service blueprinting also has become a really powerful part of service design, and is a good corollary and congruent method to journey mapping. And I think we're probably going to let system usability survey go. That gets a lot of use in a very UX-y specific setting, but not much outside of user experience. We find and the LUMA system is really there to it doesn't encompass just digital products, but products, services, systems, branding, virtually anything that is a problem that people are trying to solve. Anne, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, Patrick, thank you so much for this. This is amazing. I want to ask you about what's your point of view on those methodology versus business model. Like currently, I'm struggling with the team, very focused on the user problem, but not seeing the threat from the competitors. Mm-hmm. And like the differentiator, the value prop. So what is your point of view? That's the first question. And second question, this is amazing. I'm not sure if, I joined late. I'm wondering if I'm able to get the slides. So
sure, I'll be happy to share this.
Thank you.
You bet. The first question, a business model or business model canvas, we often will be working with a lot. The nice thing about a business model canvas, and this is true of really any good business model, is there's three fundamental parts of that. And those three parts really, I'm going to go back up here and see if I can, that's not going to work. Those three parts reflect really the three parts of that Venn diagram, right? The top right corner of a business model canvas is all about desirability. What's your value proposition, and what are all the aspects? What problem are you solving for people? And how well do you understand what market segments you're serving and all that sort of stuff? Those are all questions of desirability. The top left corner has all to do with feasibility. How are you going to put this out there? What channels are you going to use? What third-party partners might you be working with? What's your plan for scaling it? So that top left corner of your business model canvas all has to do with feasibility. And the whole bottom strip of your business model canvas is, of course, all related to the finances. What's your financial model around this? And all the aspects of that, all relating to viability. So to create a business model, whether that's a business model canvas or just a business model in general, you've got to start with understanding what problem are you solving for someone, right? Um, and part of that can certainly have to do with with doing a competitor comparison. What are they doing? Where are the gaps in how they are doing that we might be able to fit into, and make a name for ourselves. But that's all going to have to do with understanding who you're targeting, or at the very least, what problem you're solving for people. Those are all questions of desirability, usability, utility, and desirability or delight. We have to start there before we come up with the financial model, and before we start talking about how to scale a solution. We've got to frame the problem around people.
Mhm.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. I'm wondering, maybe I missed that part. Did you cover the business model canvas?
I did not. We didn't really talk about a business model canvas. Um, that is certainly one of the methods that we encourage people to look at. There's so many moving parts to it. We
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't, we don't have it in the LUMA system. Um, but nevertheless, it's a very, very useful method. And we do like it because it manifests many of those behaviors that we talked about, of innovative teams. If you're using a business model canvas, you're working in a visual way. It's a canvas for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
It forces us to question the question: what problem are we solving? Right? It's very specific on making sure that you understand what problem you're solving. It's best done as a collaborative effort. Um, it's imaginative in the sense that it's a very divergent task. You don't have to get it right the first time. Put down lots and lots of sticky notes on their thing, and then refine it. And a great business model canvas forces us to place the person that we're solving a problem for, our
Mm-hmm.
customer, at the
Mm-hmm.
center of everything that we're doing.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
So
I think a lot of designer, what I'm seeing is not linking that problem, like a user-centric problem, and then, like to put that, on the layer of the business model canvas. And
Yeah.
that's why there is a gap there. For us, very hard to talk to PMs or business partners to kind of have the same point of view. So I'm not sure if you are going to have another talk about it. I would really want to learn more about how do we, we are all focused on human, but sometimes forget about differentiator, value prop, and then the business canvas, what you are talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, I just realized a moment ago, I thought I was sharing my screen, but I wasn't sharing my screen. I hope everyone understood what I was talking about. That's a great method though. Business model canvas. We're big fans.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
But that top right corner, boom, it's all about people, all about desirability.
Great, thanks.
What other questions? We're just about at time. Pavel, do you want to wrap it up here?
Yeah, I believe like if there are no questions, folks, then yeah, I believe we can wrap up and thank Patrick for being with us like 2 hours. It was very valuable, very detailed exploration of LUMA system and problem framing frameworks and methods. Yeah, really appreciate you being with us and sharing your experience and practice. Thank you, Patrick.
Pleasure. It's been a delight to speak to you all. Please find me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect. And thank all of you for your willing listening to me and your participation.